The first time when Budu realized he had turned into a dog was 3 days after he fell from the building. To be precise, not a dog. A stray, filthy all over, one hind leg crippled, lying next to a trash heap in an urban village waiting to die. His consciousness woke inside this dog's body. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was half a bowl of spilled sour porridge. Crouching beside the porridge was a boy of 8 or 9, pushing the porridge toward his mouth with a dirty hand. The boy was called Xiaoman. No last name. A foundling picked up by the owner of the nearby scrap yard. Xiaoman said, "Doggy, eat. If you don't eat, you'll die." When Budu lay sprawled among the rotten vegetable leaves and torn plastic bags, it took him a full 3 minutes to process what had happened to him. His body, that human body that had worn bespoke suits for 48 years, had been sculpted in a gym to a standard body fat percentage, and had produced an annual physical report marked excellent, was gone. In its place was a coat of dusty, matted fur, for scrawny legs, a tail with half the hair missing, and a festering wound on his right hind leg. He tried to stand. A searing pain shot from the leg and dropped him straight back onto the trash. Xiaoman quickly reached out to help. Those small hands were so dirty that every fingernail was caked with mud, but the way they cradled his belly was light as cupping a newly hatched chick. He did not know how he had survived. The memories of the human when Budu remained intact inside this dog's brain. The CEO office on the 48th floor. The city nightscape beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the person who had pushed him off. That person was Lu Jinghe, the vice president he had spent 12 years grooming from an intern, the man he had publicly announced at the group's annual gala as my one and only designated successor. Before Lu Jinghe shoved him, he said one sentence. "President 1, you've been standing in front of me for too long." A gloved hand thrust hard against his back. When Budu's last memory was the glass curtain wall shattering behind him, cold wind flooding in, the city lights spinning away below. He did not die. His body probably did, falling from the 48th floor. No living creature could survive. But his consciousness, for reasons unknown, did not perish along with that body. It drifted for 2 days, like a fog unable to find a host, and was ultimately pulled by some incomprehensible gravity into the body of this stray dog. The dog's original consciousness had nearly gone out: wound infection, starvation, dehydration, organ failure. When Budu's consciousness entered, this dog was taking its last breaths in a trash heap. 2 dying life forms underwent, in that moment, a fusion that no existing science could explain. He lived. The price was becoming a dog. It took him 3 months to accept this fact. Those 3 months were the longest in his life. Every day he crawled between garbage piles and the base of walls, surviving on the leftovers Xiaoman brought back from the school cafeteria. Xiaoman attended 3rd grade in a primary school in the nearby urban village. The school provided 1 meal at noon every day. He would break his steamed bun in half, eat 1 half himself, and hide the other half in his uniform pocket to bring back for the dog. When Budu did not want to eat. In his life, he had tasted every delicacy under the sun. His tongue had known the dishes of the most expensive chefs on the planet. But now, lying on the concrete, rolling up the last bit of broth from the bottom of an enamel bowl with his tongue, he tasted not the broth, but the flavor of being alive. The former chairman and CEO of Mingyuan Group, when Budu, the legendary business figure who had made the Forbes list 6 years in a row, the undisputed titan of China's precision manufacturing sector, was now squatting on the concrete of an urban village, clawing at an overturned enamel bowl with his paw, laboring to lick the last drops of broth clean. Xiaoman crouched beside him watching, smiling so hard his eyes narrowed into slits. "Doggy, you're finally eating." When Budu did not answer. A dog's vocal apparatus is completely different from a human's. He had tried to speak. All that squeezed from his throat was a string of meaningless whimpers. Xiaoman thought he was acting cute and rubbed his head. That small hand was very warm. So warm that when Budu almost forgot that everything he had ever touched before was cold financial statements and precision components. Late one night 3 months later, when Budu lay in the dog bed Xiaoman had made from cardboard boxes and old cotton batting, looking at the moon outside the window. That night the moon was perfectly round, exactly the same as the moon on the night he fell. He stared at it for a long time, then began to recall Lu Jinghe's face. Not a fuzzy recollection, a precise one. The arc of Lu Jinghe's lips as he pushed him, the way he adjusted his tie just before, and the unconscious way his right hand twisted the platinum pinky ring on his little finger after adjusting the tie. That pinky ring was a gift from him. The day Lu Jinghe was promoted to vice president, when Budu had placed the ring on Lu Jinghe's finger at the annual gala in front of everyone, saying, "This ring represents my trust in you. From today on, Mingyuan's future is you." That ring was still on Lu Jinghe's finger now. Every time when Budu thought of this detail, something scorching surged in his chest. Not sadness, not rage, but something more primal, more incandescent than either emotion. Years later he would finally find a name for it. Unwillingness. A man who spent 30 years going from a workshop apprentice to an industry titan, pushed off the 48th floor by the successor he had hand-picked himself. This did not fit his entire understanding of how the world worked. It was like spending half a lifetime grinding precision parts, every component having to fit snugly into its designated place, and then Lu Jinghe's single shove threw all the gears of the world out of alignment. He was going to straighten those warped gears. This thought took root inside the stray dog's body and grew, at an almost savage speed, into the entire reason he kept living. He began to consciously observe everything around him. Which intersection Xiaoman found the most plastic bottles at? What time old Chung from the scrap yard went out and came back? Which trash can the local strays could find intact leftover bones in? He applied all the observational and analytical skills he had honed in business to surviving this urban village. Half a month later, he had become the best food finder among the neighborhood strays. The other dogs relied on their sense of smell. He relied on logic. He knew when which restaurant would roll out its slop bucket, which intersection fruit stall would toss unsellable fruit at dusk, which back door of the school cafeteria would have leftover steamed buns thrown out. With a dog's body and a human brain, he survived in the cracks of this concrete jungle. On the 137th day of clawing at an enamel bowl, when Budu discovered that this dog body was undergoing some sort of change. Not a physiological change. His wound had healed, the crippled leg could slowly walk, but a very subtle instability at the edges of his physical form. Deep at night, when he slept in the broken cardboard box Xiaoman had set up, his right front paw would, under the moonlight, briefly revert to the outline of a human finger. Only for a few seconds. The finger's outline was so distinct you could see the crescent curve of the nail, and then like sand blown apart by wind, it shrank back into a dog's paw. He stared at that right front paw, flickering between human and dog under the moon, his heart slamming against his ribs. A dog's physiological response is more direct than a human's. All his fur stood on end, his tail stiffened into a rod. He began to consciously control this instability, not through relaxation but the exact opposite. He found that the angrier he was, the more focused he was, the more violently this fluctuation came, and the longer the seconds that the human outline held. The target of his anger he chose was always Lu Jinghe. He carved Lu Jinghe's face into his brain and replayed the scene of the fall over and over in his heart. The sound of the glass curtain wall shattering, the sensation of cold wind flooding his collar, that gesture of Lu Jinghe adjusting his tie. Every detail was chiseled into his memory like a graver's knife, and every recollection made the boundaries of his body fluctuate violently. Anger stabilized him. His rage at Lu Jinghe was like an anchor, fixing him firmly to the thought of revenge. 1 year later, when Budu could stably hold human form for roughly the time it took a stick of incense to burn, 2 years later he could freely switch between human and dog form. The price was that each switch was accompanied by excruciating pain. The bones of his entire body felt as if they were smashed and reassembled, muscles torn and healed, skin burned and then cooled. He had no idea where this ability came from. He guessed that in that fall from the 48th floor, some force beyond ordinary understanding had intervened between his consciousness and the dog's. But he had no energy to delve into the principle. He was used to the pain. He had survived the 48th floor fall. This little bit of pain was nothing. He made a calculation in his head. Each switch hurt for 5 minutes and bought him 15 minutes of human activity, enough to repair quite a few pages of a book. Not a losing trade. He had to spend every minute of his human form on what mattered most. The most pressing thing was not revenge. The time for revenge was not yet ripe, but to survive. and to master a skill that let him sit legitimately in crowded places without drawing anyone's suspicion. Restoring antique books fulfilled these conditions perfectly. Sit in a corner, head down, don't talk, hands steady. His hands had always been steady. 30 years ago, when he worked as a technician on the workshop floor, the parts he ground had tolerances no thicker than a hair's breadth. Later, when he founded Mingyuan Group, he built it from precision manufacturing, relying on these very hands. There was a more hidden reason he chose antique book restoration. He needed time. A lot of quiet, solitary time requiring no conversation with anyone, to be used to untangle the technical parameters Liu Jinghe had tampered with, to comb through Mingyuan Group's supply chain data, to sort out the core technical documentation he had not finished before the fall. Repairing books gave him perfect cover. The soft rasp of book mending was like white noise, filtering out all external interference, allowing his brain to operate at high speed even as he worked. After moving through 3 cities, when Budu finally settled down in a small town by the Yangtze River, he gave himself a new name. Sui Yi. Sui as in whatever, Yi as in meaning. Whatever meaning. He had no particular attachment to his new name, just as he had no particular attachment to this life. Picked it back up, so he kept living. Living meant he had to do things. After finishing those things, he could die. He rented a wall at the very end of the small town's vegetable market, rigged an old canvas awning, and opened the wordless bookshop. The shop was pitifully small, but he didn't care. He converted his entire savings, which was really the little capital old Chang, Xiaoman's adoptive father, had given him, into a batch of old books and a set of the most basic restoration tools. Changman was Xiaoman, having taken the surname of the scrap yard owner who adopted him. Changman had grown into a half-grown boy, had followed him from the urban village to this small town, attending school while helping him run the bookshop. When Budu taught him to repair books, Changman learned very slowly, but he had a gift that even amazed when Budu. He possessed a nearly hound-like instinct for electronic devices. Anything put into his hands, once taken apart and put back together, not only worked but often worked better than before. The first time when Budu watched Changman dismantle a scrapped old computer and reassemble it into a working machine, he knew this kid would not end up repairing books. But the form he used most often was the dog. The dog identity offered him a convenience no human could provide. No one is wary of a stray dog. He could travel through every corner of the city in dog form late at night, and no one would spare him a second glance. As a dog, he scouted the entire small town, memorizing every camera location, every shop open late, every patrol pattern of the police kiosks. He also got close as a dog to Mingyuan Group's supply chain node in the small town, a parts transshipment warehouse. He lay by the warehouse wall for several nights, listening to the warehouse manager and truck drivers chatting, and pieced these fragments into a complete map of the supply chain. When Changman helped him look up data, he said, "Uncle Sui, you're fighting a war." Without looking up, when Budu replied, "Business is like war." The wordless bookshop stood for 3 years. In those 3 years, the handwritten price sign at the door was eroded by wind and rain and replaced several times. The sign read, "All reparable books fixed. Paperback 5 yuan, hardcover 20, antique book restoration negotiable. No success manuals." The last 3 words he wrote, painted over, wrote again, and painted over 3 times before settling on them. He wanted nothing to do with success manuals. The secrets to success printed on those covers reminded him of certain people. People wearing pinky rings, adjusting ties, pushing others off buildings from behind. More and more people came looking for him to repair books. His restoration skills spread through the small town. A mute-like book repairman, cheap, with a handcraft so fine it seemed a relic from another era. Someone came specially from a neighboring county, clutching a tattered ancestral genealogy for him to restore. Someone came upon his reputation from the municipal archives, asking him to restore a batch of Republican-era documents damaged by water. No matter who came, he didn't say much. He bowed his head and repaired, his fingers as steady as if they had never been reassembled. He picked pulp with a bamboo knife, tweezered out insect eggs, swept dust with a bristle brush, each movement precise as if measured by a vernier caliper. Those who came to have books repaired would occasionally notice his hands. Those hands were covered in countless scars, old wounds overlapping new, layered like tree rings. Someone asked what happened to his hands, and he only said 2 words, "Dog bites." Nobody pressed further. In this small town, everyone had a past. Everyone had learned not to ask. But Chung Man knew those were not dog bites. Those scars were the marks left by the shattering and reassembly of bone each time he switched forms. The first time Chung Man saw Sui transform from human to dog under the moonlight, he fell off the bed in terror. He covered his mouth, afraid to make a sound, but tears were already streaming down his face. After Sui changed back to human form, he looked at him and was silent for a very long time before saying one thing. "If you're scared, go. I won't blame you." Chung Man wiped his tears and said, "I'm not scared of you. I'm scared of how much it hurts you." An old professor from the nearby university passed through the market by chance and watched Sui repair books for half an hour. After returning, he told his graduate students, "That book repairman in the market has hands steadier than any human hands. Go watch his method of filling wormholes. Fingertip force, wrist suspended. The force of every cut precise down to the milligram level." One graduate student actually went, bringing a dial indicator along under the guise of waiting to have a book fixed. He came back and reported, the time he took to fill one wormhole was 40 minutes, both hands suspended the entire time, the thickness deviation of the paper pulp not exceeding 0.02 millimeters. "I measured it." The old professor was silent for a moment, then said, "Don't ask what he did before. Some people don't come here to repair books." Sui never picked up conversations. He opened the shop at 6 every morning and closed at 7 every evening, repairing a few books a day. The money earned was just enough for him and Chung Man to live the simplest life in this small town. Chung Man had grown from a scrawny urban village boy into a lanky young man. He got into a polytechnic college to study computer science, attending school while continuing to help Sui gather data. He became Sui's only ally in this small town. A book repairman and a computer science college student, they made a surprisingly good team. One afternoon, just as Sui was using a bamboo knife to fill a paper pulp patch on a Qing Dynasty local gazetteer, Chung Man rushed into the shop, drenched in sweat, and turned his laptop screen toward him. On the screen was the back-end interface of Mingyuan Group's supply chain system, densely packed with shipment numbers and quality inspection data. "Uncle Sui, I've got all of Mingyuan's supply chain data. That 99.97% yield rate Lu Jinghe announced at the press conference is fake. The real figure is only 71.2%. They've systematically tampered with the factory inspection reports, same batch of parts, but the quality standards used for their own use and the ones shipped to clients are different. The batch sent to clients uses a tolerance range loosened by more than 10 times." Sui flipped the repaired page over, the bamboo knife steadily scraping off a bit of excess pulp. That piece of pulp was no bigger than a sesame seed. The angle and force with which he removed it were as precise as balancing a Swiss movement. His fingers were smeared with pulp, the grime of old book pages embedded under his nails. "Detailed enough. Notify your Uncle Jiang. Initiate the short," Chung Man said. "Already in motion. One more thing. Lu Jinghe is holding the inauguration ceremony for Mingyuan's new production line at the Wuhan International Expo Center next week. A huge spectacle. They've invited ministry officials. Choosing Wuhan, do you think he's probing? Does he vaguely sense you're in Hubei?" Sui put down the bamboo knife and wiped the pulp from his hands with a rag. He stood up and stretched his stiff spine. The titanium alloy brace gave a faint, subtle friction sound. He walked to the front of the shop and watched the thinning flow of people in the market at dusk. The vegetable vendors were packing up, tricycles squeezing through the alley one after another, horns and haggling voices mingling, the air thick with the smell of rotting vegetable leaves and fish. Whether he's probing or not doesn't matter. Wuhan is my home turf. 5 years of the Yangtze wind. It's time he heard the sound of that wind. 1 week later, Wuhan International Expo Center. That night, the massive structure by the Yangtze blazed with lights. Hundreds of supplier representatives, securities analysts, and journalists from around the world gathered. Lu Jinghe had booked the entire main lecture hall. Center stage was a giant model of a smart machine tool. Lu Jinghe, in a bespoke dark blue suit, spoke in a slow, deliberate voice. He spoke of how he had shouldered the company's burden alone after the founder's tragic passing. When he got to the emotional part, his voice trembled. 5 years ago, when President Wen departed, he handed over all of Mingan's core technical materials to me. Sui was not seated among the guests. He slipped into the expo center's service corridors, in dog form. A dusty stray dog was unremarkable in a place like a convention center. A security guard might at most give a kick to shoo it away, not a second look. He carried a miniature signal amplifier in his teeth and placed them at ventilation openings one by one, following the points Chang Man had scouted in advance. He raced through every corner of the entire building, installing all the equipment Chang Man had given him. After finishing all this, he returned to the alley across from the expo center, lay down next to the old van Chang Man had parked there beforehand, and began the shift. When the human form shift completed, the pain was so intense he curled up completely on the ground, his whole skeleton emitting fine, crackling sounds like a rusty machine being forced to start. Summoning all his strength, he grabbed the van's door handle and pulled himself up, took out the faded gray work jacket from inside, put it on, then slung the old canvas tool bag over his shoulder. He looked at his own face in the van's rearview mirror. Hair gone completely white, several extra scars on his face, eyes deeply sunken. He barely recognized himself. But it didn't matter. Lu Jinghe would. He pushed open the front door of the expo center. Just as Lu Jinghe was about to press the remote control, all the lights in the entire expo center went out simultaneously. All cell phones went black. The darkness lasted 20 seconds. Then, outside the window, the LED light curtain on the building facades along the riverfront across the Yangtze lit up. The entire Yangtze light show turned pure white, and on that white background floated a line of black text. Lu Jinghe, do you still remember that machine tool whose parameters you altered? Lu Jinghe froze. The remote control slipped from his hand. The light curtain continued to display. 5 years ago, in the president's office on the 48th floor of Mingyuan Group headquarters, you tampered with my core technical parameters and pushed me out the window. You thought I was dead. I'm not. Today, I've come to reclaim what you stole from me. Not revenge. It's a rework. You've let the global supply chain run for 5 years on a smart production line with tampered core parameters. Every company that suffered losses because of it, every factory that shut down due to line failures, every end user killed by defective parts, all of it is on your head. The audience erupted. Reporters raised their phones to take pictures and found the phones were still black screens. Signal jamming covered the entire lecture hall. Only the words on the Yangtze light show outside the window shone coldly in the river wind. Each character the size of an entire floor. Lu Jinghe spun around and hissed toward backstage. Turn off the light curtain. Call the police. No one answered. The light curtain began playing the first document. The original patent filing records of the National Intellectual Property Administration. Inventor Wen Budu. Filing date. August 19, 5 years ago. The 7th day after, when Budu fell from the 48th floor. The second document was the approval record from Mingyuan Group's internal OA system. Applicant. Lu Jinghe. Date. The day after Wen Budu's accident. The remarks column read. Migrate all technical R&D data and supplier contracts under President Wen's name to my name. Seal the original records. Overwrite the electronic files. The third was an audio clip. Lu Jinghe's voice with the sound of wind beyond the floor-to-ceiling window in the background. President Wen, the final lesson you taught me, I've now learned. Precision manufacturing doesn't need 2 legends, 1 is enough. The fourth document was high-definition surveillance video. The complete footage of the moments before and after Wen Budu's fall. In the audience, a white-haired old expert stood up abruptly, his finger trembling as he pointed at the stage. He was an old friend to both Wen Budu and Lu Jinghe, the dean of China's precision manufacturing field, the 83-year-old academician Gu Qingping. He opened his mouth to say something, but a sharp pain seized his chest, and the assistant beside him quickly supported him. The light curtain did not stop. After the video ended, the screen switched to a data comparison table. The left side was the yield rate Lu Jinghe publicly announced at the press conference. 99.97%. The right side was the raw data recovered from Mingyuan Group's internal quality control system. 71.2%. Beneath the table was a line of fine print, taken from Wen Budu's original technical documents, annotated in red. This production line has strict limits on servo motor temperature drift. When ambient temperature fluctuation exceeds plus or minus 0.5 degrees Celsius, machining accuracy will drop sharply. This limitation is the core safety boundary of the Mingyuan line. A temperature-controlled workshop must be in place before mass production. Remember, to cut costs, Lu Jinghe had slashed the budget for the temperature-controlled workshop, pushing the defect rate to nearly 30%. In the dead silence of the hall, Lu Jinghe stumbled backward and collapsed on the stage. The darkness was chaos. The front door of the expo center was pushed open. A middle-aged man wearing a faded gray work jacket, thin build, close-cropped hair, both temples white, an old canvas tool bag slung across his shoulder. He walked up the central aisle. Lu Jinghe scrambled up from the stage, saw that face, and collapsed again as if his spine had been pulled out. When Budu Sui walked to the front of the stage, he did not look at Lu Jinghe slumped on the floor. He first bent to pick up the remote control and placed it on the lectern, then took a portable coordinate measuring machine out of his tool bag. He picked up the batch of perfect parts Lu Jinghe had on display at the press conference, measured them one by one, and projected the data onto the big screen. Parts with a nominal accuracy of 0.5 microns had actual measured deviations as high as over 9 microns. The hall was in an uproar. He then took another batch of parts out of his tool bag. These were produced using Wenbudu's genuine original parameters. The measured deviations of all parts were within 0.3 microns. He spoke to the entire hall. A restoration plan already exists. This is a corrected version of the original parameters, accuracy even higher than what Lu Jinghe touted. The complete technical plan, production line design blueprints, and quality control system have already been certified by the International Precision Manufacturing Association. All data will be made public in real time, open to global peer review. No tampering. No selective reporting. He placed the two batches of parts side by side on the lectern. The left side is what you stole. The right side is what I'm taking back. Lu Jinghe sat slumped on the floor. His right hand suddenly began to shake violently. A functional tremor triggered by long-term alcohol consumption from social engagements and immense mental shock. When Budu looked at his trembling hand, and from the tool bag took out a most ordinary vernier caliper. That caliper was old, the scale markings on its body worn faintly blurry, but the two characters engraved on the handle were still clearly legible. Mingyuan. That was Mingyuan Group's earliest trademark. 30 years ago, when Budu was still a technician on the workshop floor, this was the caliper he used. Later, he gave it to Lu Jinghe, who had just been made a full engineer. At that time, Lu Jinghe had just graduated from a university mechanical engineering department and was assigned to Budu's workshop, clumsy, unable to even hold a caliper steady. Budu had taught him hand in hand to measure his first part, tolerance plus or minus 0.01 millimeters. Lu Jinghe had to measure it 3 times before getting it right. Drenched in sweat, handing the caliper back and saying, "Master, I'm too stupid." When Budu pressed the caliper back into his hand and said, "The caliper is yours now. From now on, measure on your own. A shaking hand doesn't matter. Focus on what you need to do, and your hand won't shake." Lu Jinghe used that caliper for many years, until he was promoted to management and no longer went to the shop floor himself, then put it away in his desk drawer. After Budu's fall, when Lu Jinghe cleared out his office, he found this caliper in the deepest part of a drawer. Budu had taken it back at some point and placed it in an old small velvet box. A sticky note was on the lid with his handwriting. Jinghe's first independent QC pass, this caliper bears witness. After reading that note, expressionless, Lu Jinghe tossed the caliper into the scrap bin next to the shredder. Later, the cleaning lady thought it a pity and fished it out. It passed through several hands and ended up in a flea market. While hunting for book repair tools in the small town's flea market, Budu recognized this caliper at a glance. He spent 5 yuan and bought it back. Now he placed this caliper in front of Lu Jinghe. The jaws of the caliper reflected a sliver of cold light under the lights, exactly the same as 5 years ago. Only there were a few more fine scratches on the body, left behind during its time in the scrap bin and the flea market. Budu said, "Do you remember your first independent QC? Your hand shook so badly you couldn't hold the caliper steady? I told you then, a shaking hand doesn't matter. Focus on what you need to do and your hand won't shake." Your hand is shaking now not because of an illness. Your heart is crooked. When the heart is crooked, the hand will never be steady. Lu Jinghe stared at that caliper, his whole being seeming to have every ounce of strength sucked out. His hand still shook even harder than before. When Budu placed the caliper on the lectern next to the 2 batches of parts, turned and walked toward the door. At the doorway he stopped without looking back. His gaze passed through the hundreds of stunned, fearful, and suddenly understanding faces in the hall and found Shanlu away, shivering in the corner of the first row. She was wearing a champagne-colored tailored suit, the Van Gogh-inspired ginkgo brooch at her chest glaringly vivid in the darkness. She was still clutching that bouquet of perfume lilies, but her fingers were so stiff they no longer resembled any known gesture. Luowei. Shin Luowei shook violently. The bouquet slid off her lap, petals scattering over the floor. When Budu said, Nianhe is taking her college entrance exams this year. Her first choice is Huazhong University of Science and Technology Mechanical Engineering, the exact major you persuaded her not to apply for back then. She said she wants to see the school her father attended. You don't need to escort her to the exams. And don't let her know you know about me. She has always believed her father died in a helicopter accident 5 years ago. Let her continue to believe that. Some truths are too heavy, they shouldn't be placed on a child's shoulders. He pushed open the door and disappeared into the moonlight spilling from the Yangtze. He called her Nianhe. When Nianhe, his daughter. When he fell from the building 5 years ago, when Nianhe had just started 8th grade. She spent her entire adolescence trying to investigate the truth behind her father's death. From the aviation administration to the insurance company to Mingyuan Group's legal department, ultimately blocked by an accident report that read, helicopter mechanical failure leading to crash into the river, body not recovered. She did not believe it, but could not find evidence. She did not give up. She dug out all of the engineering notebooks her father left at home, read them all, and taught herself what she didn't understand. A humanities track student, she forced herself into an engineering prospect, going from failing physics to ranking first in her grade, winning a provincial first prize in math competitions, and then standing on the award podium in front of a sea of people. She said something that rendered everyone silent. My father is Wenbudu. He was murdered. I'm going to investigate and find out the truth for him. That year she was 15. Those words were reposted millions of times on social media before being quietly suppressed. The one who suppressed the news was Lu Jinghe. He could not let Wenbudu's name resurface in the public eye in any form. Shun Luowei sat amidst the scattered petals, her whole being like a plaster statue beginning to crack. She remembered a question her daughter had asked her this morning before they left. When Nianhe stood in the entryway, backpack on, holding an exam admission ticket, her tone as calm as if discussing someone else's business. Mom, if I get into HUST, will you be angry? Shin Luowei did not answer. She only stood in front of the mirror with her back to her daughter, adjusting her brooch, pricked her finger on the pin, drew blood, wiped it on a tissue and threw it in the trash and said, Hurry up, you'll be late. Now, sitting in the dead-silent hall of the expo center, Wenbudu's last words still vibrated faintly in the air. She thought of that blood on the brooch pin, thought of the way her daughter, after asking that question, silently looked at her for 3 seconds and then turned and walked out. She thought of how that departing back in the back that had just disappeared at the doorway looked, somehow somewhat alike, both slim, back straight, right leg dragging ever so slightly when walking. She had never noticed whom her daughter's walking posture resembled. Now she had. Almost simultaneous with Wenbudu's exit from the expo center, global capital markets collapsed. Mingyuan Group stock price on both the A-share and Hong Kong markets went into freefall over the next several hours. Its market value evaporated entirely within 2 trading days. Suppliers swarmed Mingyuan headquarters demanding returns, automakers announced suspension of cooperation, banks began calling in loans. A trillion-yuan empire crumbled in just a few weeks. All sell orders ultimately converged toward a single source, Hong Kong Boyong Capital. Zhang Boyong was his classmate from the technical school 30 years ago. The two had squeezed into the same bunk bed for 2 years. When Zhang Boyong dropped out to seek his fortune in Shenzhen, Wenbudu gave him all the meal tickets he had saved for half a year. Later, when Wenbudu started his business, the first seed capital was remitted by Zhang Boyong from Hong Kong. After closing his positions, Zhang Boyong issued an open letter to global investors containing just one paragraph. "We are not making money. We are settling accounts for a man who was robbed of 5 years." A few days later, the Securities Regulatory Commission announced a formal investigation into Mingyuan Group. The Economic Crime Investigation Division of the Ministry of Public Security simultaneously stepped in, opening a case against Liu Jinghe on multiple charges including infringement of trade secrets, falsification of quality inspection data, endangering public safety by dangerous means, and attempted intentional homicide. The day Liu Jinghe was taken away, it was raining in Wuhan. He was escorted out by 2 police officers from backstage at the expo center, head lowered, getting into a police car. When Shen Luowei was taken away, she was still holding that bouquet of perfume lilies. The flowers had wilted, the petals falling one by one onto the red carpet. Liu Jinghe was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to life imprisonment. Shen Luowei was sentenced to 3 years in prison, suspended for 4 years, for assisting in forging financial data and shielding. The platinum pinky ring of Liu Jinghe was taken into the police evidence room as material evidence. The character Jing, engraved inside the band, was photographed by the forensics camera. That year, just before the fall, when Budu had bitten that ring, he turned and bit Liu Jinghe's hand the moment he was pushed, his canine tooth leaving a fine scratch on the platinum and residual DNA. This piece of evidence had been sealed in the police archives until it was retrieved 5 years later, becoming the critical evidence that locked down Liu Jinghe's charge of intentional homicide. When Budu did not attend the trial, as a specially appointed industry advisor to the Securities Regulatory Commission, he entered Mingyuan Group to preside over its bankruptcy restructuring. He carved out the core precision manufacturing business and injected it into a new company, Guiyuan Precision. The new company's equity structure was publicly transparent, with a portion donated to the School of Mechanical Science and Engineering at Huazhong University of Science and Technology, which Wen Yanhe would soon attend, to establish the Precision Manufacturing Innovation Scholarship. All remaining assets and intellectual property were packaged into an open-source technical plan, licensed free of charge to all compliant manufacturers globally. The sole condition: products using the technology must be labeled Guiyuan Standard and are subject to random quality inspections by independent third-party agencies. After the plan was open-sourced, over 100 manufacturers worldwide applied for licenses. A precision manufacturing company from Bangalore, India, wrote in their license application email, "My factory is on the outskirts of Bangalore. The workshop walls are corrugated iron. The Indian summer is 40 degrees Celsius outside and 50 inside. The workshop has no temperature control, and the precision drifts every afternoon. This plan actually includes an alternative process for high-temperature fluctuation environments, using ordinary industrial air conditioning plus a modified thermal error compensation algorithm to stabilize the precision. I've already trial-produced a batch, and the yield rate hit 93%, more stable than the German solution I was using before." When Budu personally replied, "The alternative process was written in my old bookshop. The gaps between repairing books were just enough to figure out one thing. A good technical solution shouldn't be picky about equipment, nor about the workshop." Later, the Guiyuan Public Welfare Fund was launched, with an initial size of 40 billion yuan, all sourced from the profits of Boyong Capital's short on Mingyuan. The fund specifically supports consumers and their families who have been harmed by product quality accidents, as well as independent researchers and startups worldwide dedicated to open-source precision manufacturing technology. The only condition: when the recipients are capable in the future, they must help another person in need. When Budu called this the traceability clause, he said just like every batch in a goods supply chain can be traced back to its source, goodwill should be the same, no breaks in the chain when it is passed on. The first beneficiary was a miner in a northwest coal mine whose leg had been crushed and amputated by a malfunctioning drilling rig. That rig used defective bearings produced after Mingyuan tampered with parameters. The bearing, under high-speed rotation, suffered uneven wear due to insufficient precision. The uneven wear caused a sudden temperature spike. The temperature spike caused the material to soften, and it ultimately fractured under load. The miner was struck in the right leg by a flying bearing fragment and had it amputated from below the knee. The accident report originally wrote operator error, later corrected to component defect. The head of the expert panel that signed the corrected report was Wenbudu. Wenbudu brought Changman and personally went to that miner's home. A heated brick bed, old cotton quilts, faded New Year prints on the wall. The miner leaned against the bed, the right pant leg empty and folded beneath his thigh. His wife crouched by the cooking stove silently kneading dough, the firelight from the stove flickering her face bright and dark. Wenbudu sat on the edge of the brick bed and explained sentence by sentence his own story with Lu Jinghe, how the Mingyuan production line parameters were tampered with, and the causal relationship between the servo motor temperature drift and the bearing's uneven wear. After the miner heard it all, he was silent for a very long time. Wenbudu stood up, faced the one-legged man on that brick bed, and bowed. The miner quickly reached out to help him up. That rough hand held Wenbudu's hand, full of old injuries within reassembled bone seams, both hands trembling slightly. The miner said, "You're a victim too." Wenbudu said, "I am not a victim. I am a person responsible. I was the original designer of that drilling rig. Every gear, every shaft, every bearing's tolerance fit was set by me. If I didn't manage my student well, that means I didn't manage myself well. Your leg, I owe it." The miner was silent for a long time. The woman kneading dough by the stove stopped her hands and glanced back at Wenbudu. The miner said something that, many years later, would still make Changman's eyes redden whenever he mentioned it. "The fact that you came to tell me all this, that's enough. In my life I've seen plenty of bosses. Not a single one would come to a mining town to tell people like us the truth face to face. You're the first." The miner had a boy named Shirtu, 15 years old, who had dropped out of school because of his father's accident and stayed home to help his mother farm, feed the chickens, and care for his father. His hands were covered in calluses, but his gaze was far calmer than his peers. Wenbudu asked him what he wanted to do in the future, and he said he wanted to learn to fix machines. He said this while fixing an old hand tractor that had been broken for years in the yard, his hands greasy, but the engine already disassembled neatly, all parts laid out by size on old newspaper, every screw screwed into a foam board with its position labeled in ballpoint pen. Wenbudu crouched down and looked at those neatly arranged parts for a long time. In this 15-year-old boy, he saw himself 50 years ago. The same hands, the same focus, the same careful reverence when handling parts. Right there, he pulled out paper and pen from his tool bag and wrote a letter of recommendation on his knee. The most ordinary ruled paper and the most ordinary ballpoint pen. The paper rustled in the wind, but the handwriting was as steady as if engraved on a steel plate. The signature read, "Goyuan Precision, Wenbudu." He handed over the recommendation letter and said something that Shirtu would remember for a lifetime. "You're better than me. When I was 15, I didn't dare to take apart a tractor. When your injuries are healed, come find me. The door of Goyuan Precision faces south. You just keep heading south from Shaanxi, all the way until you reach the Yangtze, and you'll find it." That letter still sits pressed under the glass top of the miner's table. Shirtu looks at it every day when he wipes the table, not to read the content. He's long since memorized it. What he looks at is that signature, the way the last stroke of the character when curves faintly upward at the end. He wants to know for a hand to write that character how steady it must be. Many more years passed. Wenbudu's hair turned completely white, so white it reflected light under the sun. He no longer went to the shop floor himself, devoting his main energy to cultivating the next generation of precision manufacturing talent. His students were spread across manufacturing companies and research institutions in dozens of countries around the globe. Every winter solstice, he would return to that small town's vegetable market and stand for a while in front of the old shop that had been turned into the Guan Bookshop Memorial Hall. The Memorial Hall's entrance hung with his handwritten price sign from back then, protected by a glass case. The words "No Success Manuals" on it had been photographed and shared by countless tourists, becoming an online meme. But few people noticed that in the corner of the price sign there was an extremely tiny line of text, enlarged and displayed next to it by the framer. "A crooked part can be reworked, a crooked heart cannot." On the winter solstice that year, the Memorial Hall was packed with tourists. Wenbudu blended into the crowd, wearing an ordinary gray work jacket and reading glasses. No one recognized him. He had become very good at blending into crowds. Don't walk with your back too straight. Don't look straight ahead. Don't subconsciously correct someone's terminology when they discuss precision manufacturing nearby. He did it so successfully that he could stand in his own memorial hall and view the entire exhibit without anyone recognizing him. He walked up to that price sign and stood behind the glass looking at it for a long time. The glass reflected, superimposing his white-haired reflection onto those modeled characters, like two overlapping old photographs. He remembered when he wrote No Success Manuals. The bamboo knife still in his hand, the paper pulp still wet, Chung Man still leaning over the workbench asking, "Uncle Sway, what are you writing?" That was so many years ago. Now Chung Man was the youngest technical director at a cybersecurity firm, flying back from Shenzhen every winter solstice to wait for him at the Memorial Hall entrance. He turned and walked out of the Memorial Hall, into the hustle and bustle of the market. The shouts of fishball vendors, lotus root soup sellers, and tofu skin sellers rose and fell. The air was thick with pepper, lard, and the smell of freshly fried dough cakes, so rich it could momentarily overwhelm any memory. He found the spot where he had set up his stall all those years ago. Now it was a fishball stall. He closed his eyes and listened for a very long time to the sound of pages being turned. Not that anyone was actually turning pages, it was the sound in his head. Pages flipping, pulp being smoothed, the scratch of a bamboo knife. That sound had followed him since the technical school, from the workshop to the president's office, from the 48th floor to the stray dog bed, from the stray dog bed to the old bookshop, from the old bookshop to this moment. He once thought it was noise. Later he understood it was a pulse. The sum total of everything he had ever done in this life. Every part ground, every page repaired, every apprentice trained, leaving an echo. He opened his eyes and took from his tool bag the bamboo knife he had used for so many years. The tip of the blade had been worn so thin it was nearly translucent against the light. On the handle was a shallow groove pressed in by his right thumb, not deliberately carved, but naturally compressed into the bamboo fibers by the pressure of his fingertip after thousands, tens of thousands of repetitions of the same motion. He held the bamboo knife up to the winter sun and turned it. The light reflected by the bamboo knife fell into his eyes, brighter than 5 years ago. He took another item from his pocket, an old vernier caliper. He had sharpened the jaws of the caliper over and over until they could serve as a mirror. The two characters Mingyuan on the handle were nearly worn away, but the indentations were still there. He rubbed the indentations of those two characters with his fingertip, then placed the caliper back into his pocket. He did not donate these two items to the Memorial Hall. He wanted to keep them on him until the day he could no longer walk. He walked out of the market, heading back along the base of the old city wall by the Yangtze. The winter river wind blew dry and cold against his face, carrying a faint diesel smell and the coal smoke odor drifting from distant factory chimneys. He walked very slowly, his right leg dragging slightly, an old injury left from the fall, impossible to ever get rid of in this life. His walking posture was completely different from when he was young. When he was young, he walked with purpose. The workshop people all feared the sound of his footsteps. His hard-soled leather shoes banging on the workshop concrete, each step like a stopwatch counting down. Now his steps made almost no sound. The soles were rubber, the steps light, like a shadow that didn't want to disturb anyone. After shouting that line, the fishball stall lady behind him put down her phone and looked up toward the end of the street. The white-haired man in the work jacket had already almost reached the alley entrance, walking not fast, his right leg dragging slightly. The evening light at the alley entrance stretched his shadow very long, half of it lying on the wet concrete of the market, the other half bent up against the wall. The stall lady felt that departing figure looked a little familiar, that slightly dragging right leg, that walking posture that unconsciously leaned just a little to the right. She felt like she had seen it on TV. She couldn't remember who it was, but that posture stayed in her memory like a loose screw, gently rattling around in her head for days. When Budu did not hear the stall lady's words, he rounded the alley entrance and walked into the thin twilight of early winter in the small town. The old houses lining both sides of the alley began to light up with scattered lamps. Someone was stir-frying, the sizzle of the wok drifting from an open second-floor window. A child on a balcony was practicing the eru, halting and stumbling, the melody echoing in the alley like a baby bird learning to fly, flapping its wings unsteadily. He listened to the eru, his footsteps not stopping. Chung Man had already parked the car on the road beyond the alley entrance. It was the old van, still spattered with mud from the market. Chung Man leaned against the door waiting for him, wearing a faded sweatshirt, hood pulled low, scrolling on his phone. Seeing Wenbudu walk over, he pocketed the phone and pulled open the passenger door. The two got into the van, the engine started, and the taillights glowed two dim red points in the twilight. The van threaded through the small town's narrow streets and turned onto the Riverside Highway. The Yangtze glowed a dark, muted gray-blue in the twilight. The factories on the opposite bank lit up in swaths, like an upside-down Milky Way reflected on the river's surface. Driving, Chung Man suddenly said, "Uncle Sway, Sister Nyenha's admission letter has arrived. HUST Mechanical Engineering. Full scholarship." He paused, then added, "I saw it online. The school's official website posted the acceptance list. She's first." Wenbudu did not speak. He gazed out the window at the lights on the far side of the Yangtze for a very long time. Chung Man glanced at him in the rearview mirror and saw that the hand resting on the edge of the car window was trembling slightly. Chung Man said no more and focused on driving. The headlights lit up the winding riverside road ahead, the river wind rushing in through the crack of the rolled-down window, carrying that unique Yangtze smell mixed with silt, waterweed, and diesel. The van entered the gates of the Guiyuan Precision Factory grounds. The gate guard was a veteran, standing ramrod straight and saluting the van. Chung Man honked twice in reply and parked the car in front of the office building. The office building was not large, just 4 stories, its exterior painted gray. The stainless steel plaque Guiyuan Precision, hanging at the entrance. Under the plaque, a warm yellow porch light was lit, and beneath the light stood a lanky teenager wearing a slightly ill-fitting work jacket, holding a piece of paper in his hand, craning his neck to peer out the main gate. It was sure too. He was a full head taller than last year. The sleeves of his work jacket rolled up several times, revealing slender wrists. Seeing the van stop, he ran over and pulled open the door, calling out, "Master One." His voice still carried the unique hoarseness of an adolescent boy, but he shouted very loudly, the sound traveling far in the quiet factory complex. When Budu got out of the car, looked him over and said, "The work jacket is too big. Go to logistics tomorrow and exchange it for a fitted one." Shirtu grinned, revealing uneven teeth. "No need to swap. It'll be just right next year." The paper in his hand was a blueprint, a 3 size, hand-drawn in pencil, covered densely with annotations on tolerance fits and heat treatment requirements. Shirtu held the blueprint up in front of Wenbudu and pointed to a tolerance note in the upper right corner that he had revised over and over again, saying seriously, "Master One, for the tolerance fit of this bearing housing I've thought of 3 plans. I can't decide whether to use shrink fitting or cold mounting. Please take a look for me." Wenbudu took the blueprint, examined it for a moment under the porch light, then took out that most ordinary ballpoint pen from his tool bag and wrote a few words on it. Standing to the side watching this scene, Chung Man suddenly recalled many years ago, when he had stood in the same way at the entrance of the wordless bookshop, holding a computer motherboard he had disassembled into a mess, asking Uncle Sway where this capacitor should be soldered. Back then, Uncle Sway had been the same. He took the motherboard, examined it for a moment under the dim old desk lamp in the shop, then used that bamboo repair knife to point at a solder joint on the board and said, "Here." The voice was very soft but very certain. That bamboo knife was now worn as thin as a cicada's wing, but still in use. That ballpoint pen was also still in use. Chung Man suddenly felt that some things never change. They just change shape, from a bamboo knife to a vernier caliper, from an old bookshop to a precision workshop, pass from one person to another, from one city to another. When Budu handed the blueprint back to Shirtu and added a few more instructions about the heat treatment ramp-up curve, Shirtu nodded along as he listened, and after listening immediately sprinted off. He had to rush the revised parameters to the master before the heat treatment furnace closed. When Budu watched his figure disappear behind the iron door of the factory building, that thin silhouette, right leg also dragging slightly as he ran, not from an injury but imitating him. Shirtu himself might not have realized it, but he was mimicking Wenbudu's walking posture. A 15-year-old boy, unconsciously replicating an old man's gait, like one machine replicating another machine's product number, with a reverence that was almost instinctive. When Budu looked down at his own right leg, Changman said from the side. Even the walk, he learns from you. When Budu did not answer, he walked toward the office building, paused on the steps, and glanced back in the direction of the factory building. Inside the factory, rows of fluorescent lights blazed, and the low hum of operating machine tools drifted out from the open ventilation windows, mingling with the Yangtze wind, like a song with neither beginning nor end. He stood in that song for a moment, then turned and walked into the office building. The office at the end of the corridor had its light on, the door half open, the nameplate reading Technical Advisor. He pushed the door open. On the wall above the desk hung a photograph, the old wooden sign of the wordless bookshop, taken by Changman with his camera, blown up, printed, and framed. Below the photograph was pressed a line of text, the handwriting as neat as if measured with a vernier caliper. A crooked part can be reworked, a crooked heart cannot. When Budu sat down in that office chair, the armrests were polished bright from his use, the depression in the backrest exactly fitting his slightly curved spine. He picked up a bearing sample awaiting inspection from the desk, turned on the power switch of the coordinate measuring machine, and fixed the bearing onto the inspection platform. While the instrument warmed up, emitting a faint electric hum, he listened to that sound and his fingers deftly input the inspection parameters on the control panel. The probe of the measuring machine began to move, the red light point scanning every micron-level curve of the bearing's inner and outer rings, the screen jumping with dense clusters of data points. After inspecting that bearing, he entered the data into the quality traceability system and signed the inspection report with the 4 characters, Guiyuan standard. Then he stood up, walked to the window, and pushed it open to let the river wind in. Outside the window was the factory grounds of Guiyuan Precision. The lights in the workshops illuminated the entire complex brilliantly. The sounds of CNC cutting and grinding drifted out from every workshop, merging in the night sky into a low resonance. Further out, the Yangtze flowed quietly in the darkness, the lights of a few cargo ships blinking on and off at the dock on the opposite bank like winking eyes. Downstairs, Changman honked twice. The van's lights flashed twice, then turned out of the factory gate and disappeared onto the riverside highway. He had to rush back to the city. Early next morning he was flying to Shenzhen. When Budu did not see him off, only stood by the window watching the taillights vanish around the bend in the road. Then he took the vernier caliper from his pocket and laid it flat on the windowsill. The caliper's jaws gleamed with a sliver of cold light reflected from the workshop lamps, exactly as they had so many years ago, the first time he held them in the training workshop of the technical school. He took out the bamboo knife as well and placed it side by side with the caliper. 1 caliper, 1 bamboo knife. 1 workshop, 1 bookshop. The 2 symbols of half a lifetime, now lying quietly on the windowsill, cooling faintly in the river wind. He turned off the office light and walked along the corridor into the factory. The night shift workers were changing tools. Seeing him enter, they nodded in greeting. He waved a hand, signaling them to keep working, walked over to a 5-axis machining center, and picked up a just-finished part from the operation table. The part still carried the temperature of the cutting fluid, slightly warm. He turned it over under the fluorescent light. The surface roughness was as uniform as a mirror, the edge chamfers free of a single burr, every microstructure interlocked tightly in its proper place. He placed the part back on the material tray and wrote a single character "excellent" on the quality inspection log. The final stroke of that "excellent," that faint upward curve, was identical to the curve of the signature on the recommendation letter still pressed under the glass of the miner's table.